We're now joined live in studio by the one and only Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press, among many other qualifications. So let's start with the obvious. Is this the retaliation everyone's been waiting for, and is this the end of this tit for tat between Iran and Israel?
Well, it appears to have been calibrated such as to look like something, while not compelling Iran to have to reply. No, we don't really know how much damage was done, but it's probably a positive sign that Iran is attempting to diminish it, because if you're preparing a counter strike, you'll be howling in outrage at what was done to you. Look, I hear Blinken talk about de-escalation, and that's a very laudable notion in the world, but realistically, for the situation to de-escalate with Iran, it requires Iran to end its skullduggeries all over the region. You still have the Houthis messing up global shipping trade. You still have Hezbollah, an massively unfinished business in the north. The reason why the attack on the Damascus consulate happened is because Iranians were in Damascus helping Hezbollah attack Israel, when Israel has absolutely no enmity towards Lebanon. It is madness, and the capo di tutti capi is in Tehran. So I'm glad that they're adding sanctions to their previously lame sanctions. Right. The word lame applies mostly to the sanctions on Iran.
What do those sanctions do? I mean, are they going to be any kind of deterrent?
Well, probably not, unless the U.S. and the G7 can compel the global South and emerging powers like China and India to isolate Iran. At the end of the day, Iran it may be too late. It may be too late to prevent Iran from becoming effectively a nuclear power, because they already are a nuclear threshold state. And therefore, I think the goal of the world, which I do believe aligns with the goal of the Iranian people, who are an excellent people with an amazing thousands-year-old culture, who deserve better than this ridiculousness that's been imposed on them since 1979, to compel a regime change in Iran.
So we're going to come back, because actually, we'll come back with you in a second, because there is actually movement, at least within Iran, because today, first of all, in Tehran, the streets were filled with anti-Israel protesters shouting things like "death to Israel." This after last night's alleged drone strike on Iran. However, the usual silenced voices of Iranian civilians are being heard in the form of graffiti. You can see some of the images on your screen, some in Farsi, some in English, voicing support for the Jewish state to strike at the heart of the Islamic Republic. The one in English, "Hit them, Israel. Iranians are behind you." Another one in Farsi translating to "Strike, Israel. We'll do the rest on the streets." Is this a sign that people not afraid to try to get the big bad wolf?
They're not afraid to scroll some graffiti. And yes, and there is with cyclical regularity, anti-government protests in Iran, and we all become hopeful that it will come to something. And generally speaking, the regime has developed a pretty good system to suppress these brush fires very brutally, and that's worked for them, and it's worked for them for over 40 years. And look, in the current situation right now, it does kind of look like between Israel and Iran, there's a mutual desire to move on. I don't know who came out on top, because Israel did certainly show Iran that, it can reach its nuclear sites, even if it doesn't attack the nuclear sites. It knows where they are. They're vulnerable.
Yeah. Even the White House has no comment.
Sure. But Iran, I do believe, surprised Israel with its significant reaction, unprecedented reaction to the killing of the Revolutionary Guard leaders. Mm-hmm. And so I have to wonder whether next time Israel contemplates assassinating some senior figure who's helping Hezbollah in Damascus, they might not be deterred. So I think, let's call it a draw.
Yeah. All right. So I can't believe that we are still here. We know nothing about the hostages, and we're at Passover. It is still
almost 200
days.
200 days, just about. I would say I can't imagine what they're going through, but unfortunately, I think we can imagine what they're going through. I sense, we talked before about a possible endgame in Gaza, and might it involve leaving Hamas in power at the end of the day? I sense there is a little bit of a shift in public opinion in Israel, arguing to prioritize the hostages. And since it's clear that Hamas will not release all of them, without Israel ending the war. Since it's quite clear that they won't survive forever, if you don't want to abandon the hostages, you may call it a day and understand that you live to fight Hamas next year as well. And indeed, if Israel does pull out of Gaza, does suffice with the damage it has wrought, basically, and Hamas has been clearly diminished and degraded, if it has to resume the fight at some point, it will be doing so without one hand tied behind its back. And currently, that's the situation. Why are they on the cusp of Rafah not going in for 3-4 months? Is it really just because of the wagging finger of Blinken? No, it's also because they don't really seem to have a very good plan to guarantee that this doesn't, A, become a bloodbath, because there's 1.5 million people there, displace people in tents, and B, kill the hostages. So it really is a dramatic situation.
Do you have any reason to believe or hope that a deal could squeak through? I mean, it's very hard to remain hopeful when every time there's a possibility it falls through, and now Qatar is kind of just saying, we give up in a way.
Yeah.
What?
Well, look, we have for a while been speculating that since Hamas won't release all the hostages and Israel won't pull out, maybe a partial release for a temporary ceasefire, that kind of made sense. Since Hamas doesn't care about the deaths of civilians, Israel doesn't have much leverage. And it turns out that all they want to do is an all-for-all deal. All the hostages, those are alive in the bodies, in exchange for an end to the war.
That's why here we are still talking
and
about it.
that would be brutal, but it may end up happening.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan Perry. And thank you all for watching I24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Have a great rest of your evening.